Nigeria stands out among other African countries with the largest population, the largest economy, and a very diverse culture with over 500 spoken languages, and is located in West Africa. Imagine growing up among 230 million people with limited resources, among a young but unproductive population, where several people live on less than $1 a day. Chances are that you may have met the infamous Nigerian prince via email in the past, or heard about the notorious 419 schemes. Hopefully, you've never been a victim of that. But the Nigeria's story is not one of doom and gloom. Nigerians uniquely stand out both in Africa and abroad. Some say Nigerians are the loudest or the smartest among immigrants. Some think their men are the best to date or to marry, while some who may have experienced the Yoruba demons or the Igbo ninjas in the past would think otherwise. Nigerian immigrants are remarkably highly educated, with about 60% holding at least a bachelor's degree, compared to other foreign-born immigrants with only about 30% able to achieve a minimum bachelor's degree, or even the US-born population living amidst so much resources, yet only about 32% able to obtain a minimum bachelor's degree. Many Nigerian households boast of couples with doctorate degrees in high-performing professions. In Nigerian families, it's common to be steered towards careers in STEM fields. You either become a doctor, an engineer, or you become a disgrace to your family. What about Nigerians make them so special among immigrants? Today, I have the honor of sitting down with my friend and a university colleague, Moses Kolidoye. Both of us holding doctorate degrees in engineering, and together we'll unpack the realities of the average Nigerian immigrant, the challenges, the successes, and everything in between. Through personal experiences, we discuss the unique experience of growing up in Nigeria, the transformative journey of immigration, and the role of faith and culture in shaping a Nigerian's worldview. You don't want to miss a second of this down-to-earth conversation. Please smash the subscribe button and let's get into the conversation. It's funny. My wife and I were doing a drive just yesterday, actually, and we we got into an area just in Ontario here, and she asked me and said, "Would you live in this area? That there are nice houses here?" I said, "Yeah, I like to build a nice house here, if possible." But I say the only factor why I wouldn't move to that specific spot is that they're actually anti-progress. And I think she was taken aback and said, "Well, they are anti-progress. They don't want the highway to even be built near
Mm,
them because, oh, they like their population so the way they've been since the 60s or 50s."
mm,
And I was like, man, I wouldn't want to do that. I want
mm,
somewhere where people are open to progress and there's
mm,
constant motion. And I think
mm.
that kind of characterizes us in some ways as Nigerians, isn't that so?
Yes, yes, yeah. If you're coming from it, like, and I say this carefully, but I'm coming. Okay, I would say I speak about myself. I don't want to generalize everyone, but I'd say, like, if you're
Right.
coming from the trenches, quote unquote, right, you kind of see the kind of leap it takes to go from point A to point B. So you have this, you're in this space. I was born and raised in Oshodi, Lagos, right? I see how, oh, I've moved to Europe. There's a very huge chasm in terms of infrastructure, right? Payments, we're doing great. We're way ahead. We're way ahead of anything I've seen in Europe, right? But when it comes to physical infrastructure, we're not even close, right? And I kind of feel like we're bringing that same energy of, hey, let's build bridges, let's build roads, let's do this, to a place where people are already quite comfortable, they're steady, and they just want easy life, and which is
Hmm.
all good. Like, it's all, like I said, it's all compromises, right? You have to pick and choose what you're optimizing for. So you're optimizing for, you want to raise kids, you want to be happy, you want to have vacations and all that stuff. It's absolutely great. Like, I would take that if I was in the same position, right? But if you're coming from a place where you've had to fight all your life to get the results that you want, and you still have that energy in you, you definitely don't want to be in a place where people are, guarding the goalposts. You want to be out there, making a good kill, if I can use that term.
Man, you just sound like one of them Nigerians.
I'm still very much Nigerian. I try to keep that part to myself. Still.
Yeah, really. I don't think you can take a Nigerian out of Nigeria, but it looks like you can take some Nigerian elements out of a Nigerian, a true Nigerian, especially some of us that we grew up from the difficult part of life in Nigeria. I think for some people they had it really good, the ones I like to call the overprivileged class. I think the mentality could be different when you meet people out here. But you said you grew up in Oshodi. I grew up in a very small town, relatively small, Elisha in Osun State. And you move out and the experience is totally different. But in your opinion, you've been in I think you even left Nigeria before me. You left in 2013 or 14. You left before everyone that I knew from the class.
Yes, 2013. I think my final year.
Did you graduate?
I graduated. Yeah, I mean, that I graduated.
Of course.
But, it's a very good joke. I remember going to the Senate building of the university that we graduated from, which we'll talk about later. But I remember going there and going to ask for my certificate, and they were like, "You asking for you just like you guys just finished, right?" I think I was the first. I had my first name on the list, because you write your name once you get yourself. My name was the first. So my mind was already made up. In the final year, I started learning Spanish in my final year of college, final year of FUTA, and I was like, I don't see myself doing the kind of things that I want to do in this country, right? And it just so happens that 2013, I was so out of Nigeria. I did think I would go back. I thought I would, go out, stay, but I mean, as it's been, it's not the kind of place where things are just a lot harder. The noodle is a lot harder to move. That the kind of firepower you need to get stuff done. I don't think I have that kind of firepower yet. So so I'm still out here hustling, basically.
Really hustling, we can tell. So what factor was it that you saw in Nigeria in 2012 that made you decide that this is not a place to be and you'd rather move out?
Yeah, I like to look at numbers. I like to inform my decisions based off of numbers. So I was looking at the time, we all did electrical engineering, electrical electronics engineering. If we were being practical, we didn't have the industries that could assimilate all of that talent, right? I remember our class 2012, just too many talented people. I could almost bet on my finger everybody in that class had something going, like just so much talent in that small class of 90 something, 100 students, right? So even if we take our class alone, right, just going out there into, I don't know, Akure or Lagos, I really don't see the kind of industries that can assimilate us. Just our class. So we're not talking about other departments. We're not talking about computer science, metallurgy, mechanical engineering. It's very overwhelming. And I also looked at the people who had graduated a year or two before. I see them taking jobs at banks, as bank tellers, which is great. It's comfortable. It pays well at the time. But I just didn't think this was the kind of thing I wanted to do.
You didn't think that was for you, right?
Yeah, and I wasn't hoping that a miracle would happen. I did get like offers from, I interviewed with some companies, but it also felt like when the option to take a scholarship, I got a full ride scholarship in a university in Italy, which is kind of weird story because Nigerians don't generally go to Italy to study. It's not a typical study destination. But when I got that, I just felt like, this is just a sign that I should jump, and I did.
Yeah, I think the true sense of what life will look like after school hits. And I think it hits people at different periods. I think you're probably one of the first people that really hit even before graduating, right? That you say right from final year that the system is not there to assimilate all of us into the workforce. And let's actually take a look at some data here with respect to workforce, which is very interesting. I was talking to one of our colleagues actually from another department I told you about just earlier. The population in Nigeria right now, on paper, On paper, I think I disagree with that population, but on paper, it's about 220 million people. I somehow think it's about.
more or less?
I think it's more. I think we're
Okay.
probably around 300 million people
Okay.
in Nigeria. Take Lagos alone. Come on, if you stand on the bridge in Oshodi, Lagos, where you say you grew up, I think that's an underrated population. But 220 million people in Nigeria, and there is a working age population, which is the age between about 18 to 64 years, and it's about 122 million people in Nigeria. Then there's the labor force population, which is the people who can actually work and should be working, and it's 75 million people in Nigeria. Now, out of that 75 million, the number gainfully employed currently is about 35 million. So about half of that is gainfully employed. And then the unemployed people is about 20 million of them. And it's interesting when I saw that number, I thought, oh, that's about half of Canada's population, 20 million people.
Those are really scary numbers. Yeah.
It is. So essentially, it means the nation has a largely unemployed population. And that means unproductive young people. Mind you, Nigeria actually stands as a very pivotal nation, especially in the years to come. By 2050, the projection says actually that Nigeria will surpass the United States in population, for instance. It means not only huge human resources, you have an opportunity for capital resources. And if you have a huge resources like that, and and it's also a very young population. But then it's a young, unproductive population in Nigeria. So you have others who are like partially employed, the bus driver, the bus conductor, the agbero in Lagos. Those ones are partially employed, but you have about 20 million people who have no jobs. Now, what are you talking about? 2012, right? You look at that kind of statistics and you feel like, holy crap, like what opportunities do I have here? And then there are now other factors in the system where everybody suffers alike, whether you have a job, you don't have a job. Insecurity is a big one, right? The lack of basic infrastructure and amenities in the society, right? Those are issues that we deal with. So when you put all of that together, that is where we're all coming from. And that's the kind of data that you thought about, I guess. Maybe not exactly, not like you looked it up.
Yeah, not well articulated like this. Yeah.
Right. But you imagined it and you felt like, oh, I gotta get the hell out of here. I would imagine, right?
Yeah. It's the I think my point of view was more anecdotal. So it's just looking at anecdata and saying, oh, I know there's 3 people who've graduated who, they're not exactly doing electrical engineering, they're not doing computer programming, they're not doing any of those things. So they work at the bank or they're teaching, or which are all very noble professions. But I think it's just underutilizing the so much talent that people have. So you spend 5 years in college or extra 6 years in college because ASU strike and all the extra things that happen to us that traumatize us in college. And then we get out of all of that chaos and all of that situation, and then we go do like stuff that we could have done if we just learned trades, right?
Sure.
I feel like learning a trade is just as noble as going to college if you put your mind and heart to it and you learn how. Like I know mechanics who are able to upgrade themselves, feed their families, and do amazing things. Build houses and settle down. Way more than the college graduate who studied something very niche but cannot apply that niche subject because there's just no industry to assimilate that kind of talent, right? So mine was looking more at the anecdata and saying, hey, I have this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 data points, and I'm kind of informing myself. I'm not hoping that some magic or miracle will happen or my case will be different, as people say. I just went with the data.
So where was your faith?
Good question. I'm still very Christian, and I know the faith has to go hand in hand with work. When you have a nation of, if you look at the stats again, it says about half and half. You have Christians and Muslims. There's not exactly half and half, but yeah, the numbers can be a bit skewed. But if all of us, we praying and asking God and saying, hey, we want jobs, and there's really no industry to take us, how is that going to work? right? So there's rubber meets the road. Rubber needs to meet the road, and this is where
Mhm.
reality check needs to apply when we ask for things, right? There's just no industry. You have to go with the data.
Right. So let me give you more data, actually. So since we're talking about data now, so you come out of college, you're first of all fighting against this humongous number, right? 20 million people who are out there seeking jobs, and you're going to join that pool of unemployed people.
Mm.
I think we're not even talking about, when we say gainfully employed, we're not talking about what level of income is it? How
Mm.
much can you afford for, basic lifestyle? Can you own a home? Can you buy a car? Can you feed a family? The basic things that to a large extent we don't have to bother too much once we leave the shores of the nation. Take, for instance, the minimum wage in 2012, when we were graduating, was 18,000 naira. By 2018, which is 6 years later, it was still 18,000 naira. But the problem with that is the purchasing power of that
Mm.
18,000 naira. In 2012, that 18,000 was 114 USD. And by 2018, it became 60 USD. And when we're talking about minimum wage here, I think for Canadian friends and foreigners here, they might be thinking, oh, it's per hour. We're talking about per month. Minimum wage is per month in
It's really
Nigeria,
scary.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And in 2020, the minimum wage moved to 30,000. And by then, 30,000 became 84 USD. And currently in Nigeria, it's still 30,000 naira, but it is 32 USD per month. So if you scale that down, you're essentially living on less than $1 per day in Nigeria. And
Yeah.
many of these people are still graduates, many even maybe graduates of engineering like we are. And let's not even add on top of that inflation, right? Inflation on the average in Nigeria has been about 30% per year. It went
Mm.
way over that at some point. When I think 30%, I imagine, the cost for my mortgage going up by about 30%. I will probably run out of this world or go look for some other businesses to do to make up for that 30%. But you look at all of those data, hopelessness must just grip your mind as a young person leaving Nigeria, and something tells you right now that you should get out of Nigeria, which is the reason why you, me, and a bunch of us, we were taking the random statistics the other time about how many of us from the class. I think there were about 90 of us that graduated, right? As far as I
Yeah.
knew, over 20 of us have left Nigeria, which I think is way more than
Probably
that.
more. Probably more. Yeah. I probably know more. Yeah.
What does this do to the mind when you think about the reality on ground? Does it give a sense of hopelessness? Or is there a fighting spirit that you think comes out from the average Nigerian like you did? I think it's a fighting spirit. I don't know if it's even a fighting spirit or a runaway spirit.
Well, it's a mix. So you need to. So it's a thing where you need to run away from a fight that's bigger than you. So it's like I can't really articulate the proverb, but they say like you get away from
He
a
that
fight so you
lives
can
to
leave to fight
fight will,
another day.
will yeah, exactly. He's the run
Yeah,
away from the fight will live to
yeah,
fight another day, right?
exactly. I said earlier that I didn't go back because I didn't feel like I had the firepower to take on the powers that be, and I still don't think I do. I'm just an independent agent at the moment. So I think running away, if I'll call it that, but I don't think I ran away. I'm still I still visit every year at least. Um, I think it's just a case where you realize that there is a kind of chasm that you can't cross. There's a kind of social chasm you can't cross if you stay in that country, right? If you're raised in a ghetto, and you stay in that country, you probably will end up in the same social class, and then on and on and on like that. And then you know that you put in so much investment in your life. Your parents have invested so much in your life. You know you have talent. You don't need anybody to convince you that the right thing to do is to take your talent to where it should be appreciated or where it will be valued. And I think this is what a lot of people are doing. And the numbers don't lie. A lot of us moved out. Life is a lot more, way more, not even a lot more. It's on a different level, right? Like you say, you have a mortgage. I have a mortgage as well. These are not luxuries you are afforded in a country like Nigeria. You can't get a mortgage, but I don't think it's a conversation that normal people have on the streets. People are just trying to get food. So it's very
Yep.
scary. It could be paralyzing. It could almost leave you hopeless. But I still think that the numbers again speak for themselves. If you have so many people, there is no way that I think on the planet you will have so many people continue to perpetually stay in poverty without it actually affecting the planet as a whole, right? So think about just ballpark 500 million people or a billion people living in poverty. I think that's just it's a big we're just underutilizing a lot of the resources that the planet has, right? So you think about a lot of the problems we have in science today, right? Say biology or computer science. If you have all of this extra brains committed to that cause, I think we have a closer chance at doing a lot of the big things we want to do on this planet, right? Going to Mars, whatever. I don't know whatever ambitions that we have, or even resolving a lot of the social issues that we have currently. And I think with the way population is expanding in Africa, it's just something we can't ignore. At some point, we have to live and face that battle and not run away from it.
Yeah, I think sadly, when it comes to the true reality of each nation taking care of its own, there is no nation that actually cares about another nation. That's one of the things I believe, that when we have to go to Chatham House in the UK, for instance, when politicians are going to be elected in several African countries, and you do all of that in hope that you think, oh, those nations or those organizations they want your nation to prosper, and they want the average one to have better economy, or for you to be more competitive on the global landscape as a nation. But I think that's total nonsense. It's not possible. Like, there's no nation seeking the good of the other. And I think that's the point we miss in a lot of African nations, that we're not actually realizing that nobody gives a cent about you if you don't about yourself. I think China realized that in the course of time, and that's why they're where they are today. At some point, they had to give up on killing each other and the like, and they had to commit to actual development. But we don't have that in most African countries. We can speak for Nigeria, for instance. What do you think about it?
Yeah, no, I think it's like diplomacy is about give and take, right? It's about compromises. Even down to an individual level, yes, to some extent we're selfless, families or even with strangers. But when you talk about a nation's resource, if you represent a nation, you have to represent the interests of your country, right? There's really not much room for, like, it's even more a lot with globalization happening. It's a lot more pronounced that countries have in-house problems, that for them to
Right.
start saying, oh, we want to give you aid or we want to help you, it just seems that there's a bit of dissonance if a politician goes and says, oh no, we need to keep funding this country outside of our own perimeter, when they have in-house problems. Housing prices, there's housing crisis, economic crisis, GDPs are taking a nosedive, and all of these problems we have in the world. And if you come into the negotiating table, you have to come with some kind of national interest. And I don't think any African country will necessarily have it easy, waiting for handouts. Also, we do have the resources, right? It's not like we don't have something we can negotiate with. It's not like we're coming empty-handed. It's just the way power is currently structured, which I don't pretend to know a lot about. There's lots of power dynamics, global power dynamics, but yeah, I don't see charity, international charity, being a sustainable thing. Like, yes, we can fund NGOs, but I don't think countries funding other countries, it's not a sustainable model for the donor.
Yeah, totally. I don't see any country that has emerged from poverty, from all of my readings, through donations and handouts from other countries. You got to take the bull by the horn and take charge of your economy for yourself. So Nigerians end up, many of us, scattered abroad in many places. let's talk about the numbers first of all. I think there are many questions firing through my head right now that I could ask you. So in 2016 alone, Nigeria sent the largest number of African students abroad. About 95,000 students was sent abroad. 95,000. That's a whole lot. So now you look at Nigerians abroad, you and I inclusive now, right? The education level that we attain when we're abroad is a minimum of bachelor's degree for the most people. Most Nigerians, about 60%, have at least a bachelor's degree. Compared to the foreign-born population, take for instance Canadian or American. American, for instance, is 30% of them would have bachelor's degree, and then you have um, the US-born population, rather, I should say, is about 30%, and other nationalities that immigrate abroad also is about 30% of them that will have a bachelor's degree. It's funny that I have some friends that, couples, both of them have doctorate degrees. You also have a doctorate degree. You're
I do.
guilty of that. And why do you think we go to school that much?
I actually haven't thought a lot about that. At least in my own case, I think going to school just it felt like I needed all of those things, at least at the time, to get the kind of opportunity that I felt like everybody else was getting just handed to. And I say this very carefully, but this is my experience, right? I finished my master's program. The kind of jobs I was getting were basically because people generally know that they're going to fund your visa, so they tend to lowball and say, hey, and I just felt like instead of taking this job, I might as well just go and do a PhD. And my professor was just very kind at the time. It's like, oh, look, you're very talented. If you don't get funding from the government, I can fund you. And fortunately, I got funding from the government. So my story was more like thinking again about compromises, looking at the data and saying, oh, if I went to get a job, this is what I'll be earning monthly. It's just a few quid above my PhD stipend at the time. And I just thought it just makes a lot more sense to do a PhD. I loved, computer science. I wanted to dive deeper. And I think for me, it was a very big net positive. Now I can't speak for other people, but yeah, it seems like when we're trying to make trade-offs, it does seem like the path that has the least resistance sometimes for a lot of people is just going to school and staying in school, right? And yeah, that just happens to be, and we do have the head for it, right? Given that people also have that kind of like, they've had a good foundation, so to speak, and they feel like they have the head to do it, and they just do it. Maybe you talk about your case. So you put me on the spot. I could.
Well, really, the only reason I did a doctorate, I think somehow I have to admit, first of all, that it's kind of wired into you as a Nigerian, especially when you're coming from the middle class. Having a doctorate is a thing of pride. But honestly, it wasn't as much of that reason for me why I proceeded to do a doctorate. So I actually started off with a master's. And then it was just a random conversation with my prof that time that, oh, I saw some people, end up graduating with a PhD, that maybe I could do something like that. And then he said, actually, yeah, that you could do that, that you've had a really good progress in your master's. I will approve it. We'll just sit down with the committee and, we quickly wrap up your master's here and you proceed straight for a PhD. So I was like, oh, how many years would that take me? So I thought, okay, do master's for 2 years or just get a PhD? I thought, 4 years I can be done, which eventually didn't take. It didn't take me 4 years. It took me 5 years to be done. But like you said, you see people graduating and with a master's degree. The pay was not all that good, even though in Canada the process to getting naturalized as an immigrant is more defined. You can get a 1-year postgraduate work permit and the like. But I didn't like the pay, so I thought, okay, if I've stayed this long, I might as well, go the extra and just get a doctorate. And that's how I just went for it. And by the time I was graduating, I already got a full-time job. So I went from work to go defend. I think you did that kind of thing too when you were defending your doctorate. You got a job right away.
It was pretty much the same. I already got the job. I'd interviewed with like a couple of companies. There was an offer from Yelp. There was some other software development company in Milan at the time, as I was based in Italy at the time. And then Google was also in the pipeline. I'd finished interviewing like 3-4 months before I defended my PhD. I already got the offer from Google before I actually defended my PhD. So it kind of puts you in that higher expertise bracket, right? In terms of like, what you're able to deliver, the kind of value you are able to deliver to the company. I think this is the perceived kind of, you're thinking about, if I hire this person, how much am I paying them? How much is the company getting back? It's a quick pro quo. How do you say?
Right.
Yeah, and it just felt that way, and I feel like the
So,
PhD really just ups the ante.
right. So, were you able to negotiate your entry level salary when you got the job?
Did I actually negotiate? I think the only I didn't do enough negotiating. I got way more stock from Yelp. Google was given less stock, and I think I asked them and said, "Oh, this is what Yelp is giving," and it just came up with one number, and I wasn't up to what Yelp was giving, but the base salary was higher than what Yelp was giving. And I also looked at the stock performance. Okay, Google has way better stock performance, potentially in the future as well. It looks, and in retrospect, it felt like the right decision, but I felt like I could have negotiated way better, because I just felt like, oh my God, Google, it was just like, oh, let me take it and not negotiate too much, because if they if the recruiter just decides, I don't think it's a thing that ever happens, but yeah, you don't want to play your hand too hard. You just want to
Right.
play safe.
And I
Yeah.
find most of us, when we're coming out of school, whether doctorate or masters, we're very careful negotiating. At least you're grateful for that
Yeah.
offer that looks great enough. And it's
Yeah.
like, okay, when I move, if I move, or when I change
Yeah.
roles, I can negotiate better. Yeah.
Yeah.
But in hindsight, sometimes I think back like, oh goodness, I could have negotiated that first entry
Yeah.
level salary.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the things you don't know, it's just I also didn't really have, I don't think I had people who I could have spoken to and would have said, hey, you should negotiate harder. Everyone I was speaking to was like, oh my God, they're just giving you a pat on the back, saying, oh wow, you got into Google, that's amazing, go for it. So people weren't saying like, oh, what are they paying you? You could sit down and kind of talk through your stock. Base salaries, they tend to be more fixed, but then
Right.
in terms of equity, you have a lot more room and say, hey, this, that, and then. But yeah, it just, in retrospect, I think it's a net positive experience. I don't regret it.
I know you're enjoying this conversation right now and can't wait to get back into it. But if you're getting some value from this conversation, I think it's a good time to like the video and subscribe to the channel. You can also follow me at Revaluate with Fola on social media. That's on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for more conversations like this. So let's get back into the conversation. So you went from electrical engineering to computer science. So there's a thing among Nigerians too. You either go into the STEM field or you become a lawyer or an accountant. It's either, become a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, or you become a disgrace to your family. Parents also, kind of hardwire that thing into you growing up as a little kid, right? And I think back then people frowned at kids that played sports because they didn't do that great, and sports was also not this lucrative as it is now. But I think now people are more lenient in their consideration for sports now. But what is wrong with us? Why do we go into STEM fields, and what's the benefit in your own estimation now? Practicing in the field, you studied the field as high as it could get.
Yeah, I think there's always that sense of, like you say, it's a sense of prestige, which I don't think we had that. My parents didn't really care if I had a PhD or not. They're just like, dude, go do something with your life. And I said I was doing a PhD, like, again, you're going,
Really?
But I think there is that general sense of prestige, and we kind of. We kind of want that, like, oh, doctor or lawyer. I remember growing up in primary school, if you ask people what they wanted to be, you wouldn't say something like, I'm gonna be a footballer. Everyone would look at you like, are you serious? You want to be a footballer? That's like, so why are you studying?
No future
It just
ambition.
feels like there's a disconnect. Yeah. And so, yeah, people would say things like, be an engineer and be a lawyer and be a doctor, because it comes with a kind of prestige. But I think with the digitization of most professions these days, we also start to see that if we need to ask ourselves, what are we actually optimizing for? Right? If we're optimizing to make ends meet, if we're optimizing to get salaries, there are way more things in the world than all of this things that sound prestigious that people may not necessarily be passionate about, right? If you end up being a footballer, or if you even end up being, like MKPHD, for example, is a good example, right? I know it's American, but probably wouldn't. But yeah,
Mhm.
you review devices, review phones, review all of this new gadgets, and then you have, I don't know, millions of followers, and then each view you're getting millions of dollars. If that's what people want, people can actually optimize for this kind of roles. But I think the knowledge was also very limited on the part of our parents, not in a judgmental way. It was just what they knew. It was just what they knew best. Looking at Nigeria at the time, you could see that the people who got into the government roles, because the government role was also the comfortable role at the time. If you told someone that you got an offer from the government, it would be a lot more desirable, say in the 70s or in the 60s, because that meant that you were made for life. You got that government role, but which is not the case today. You don't see a lot of young people pandering and saying, "Oh, I want to get a government role today." So I think
Well,
those
it's
times really moved me.
30,000 naira minimum wage. There's nothing prestigious about that.
Yeah, no, there isn't. But I just think our parents still had those notions about what they experienced, and they try to project those on us. And looking at the way the world has moved, how things have been digitized, I think the next jobs. I really don't even know what the next jobs will look like for like people who are going to elementary school today, right? Because it could be anything. So it's just really hard. It's really hard to try and fit people into certain, so say, oh, this is how it has to be if the world is going in a certain direction, right? I'm
Right.
thinking people are doing prompt engineering, for example. Prompt engineering did not exist when I went to college. Like, what's that? What's prompt engineering? Now, people are actually doing prompt engineering because it's how you get the LLMs to speak or to act the way that we want them to act. So this is one of the interesting points I think about, like the disconnect between jobs and what universities or what parents are actually guiding their kids
Mhm.
to go study.
So how solid do you think our background was coming from the universities in Nigeria?
Um, that's a very good question. I think the fact that the a lot of the systems were not up to par in a global sense also meant that a lot of people learned to be self-reliant. Futa's motto, well, quite
Oh,
ironically, or
true.
I don't know, it's
Right.
technology for self-reliance,
Mhm.
right? So the fact that you don't get access, there's a self-starting attitude that or lack of infrastructure just sets you on a path of you have to solve your own problems yourself. No one's going to come solve them for you, right? And in terms of like the way you think, you have to think creatively, independently. Like I remember when we were in college, you will remember this as well. Like, third year, people were already doing things like, programming microcontrollers. People were getting gigs with the Ondo state government, going to do like Google
Mhm.
developer groups and doing all of this, like Microsoft Imagine Corp and all of that stuff. I wasn't too involved in a lot of those. It was final year until I, got really involved with like programming microcontrollers, because the reality was hitting us really hard that the material the professors were using were completely still irrelevant, like just too old, and it was archaic, to say the least. And then we just realized we needed to self-start. We needed to figure out how to crack this whole thing. And I think that was the element that actually uh, got us where we were, not the actual going to college.
So would you think you had to do a lot of relearning and updating stuff when you started your masters abroad? See?
Oh yeah, there were. I had to go back to first principles. There were things that I like. It wasn't a question of what. I think what Nigeria really instilled, or what the Nigerian education system instilled in me, was not what, right? Because the what you can actually read it up. It's the how.
Yeah,
How do I learn, right? So how do I
exactly.
find new information? And I think that how was what also set me apart in my class. So I think about my class in Italy. We get, lecture materials from the professor. We're going for oral exams, and people focus on the professor's material. And I would literally go on Wikipedia, I would download papers, I would just read this, read that. And my friends are like, you don't need to read all of this stuff. Why you just focus on the professor's material? I'm like, no, I'm trying to learn stuff, right? And the way we were brought up is just read stuff. We download this and read that and go to the cyber cafe and do this, do that. They were more focused or fixated on the professor's material. I just felt like I was more interested in, the how I'm learning what I'm learning,
Right.
right? So I think that
Right.
how is that feature that just differentiates you, not so
Yeah, I,
much
I
the
think
what you've read.
that's a very interesting point. I probably didn't ever put it like that, but I did a lot of teaching assistantship, and I was an
Mm.
instructor for a bit too when I was in grad school. No, were you? Did you do any teaching assistantship?
No, I never did any of those. So my program was in English, but doing the teaching assistant role meant that I needed to teach in Italian, which a lot of the undergrads
Oh,
were in Italian. I speak Italian, but the technicality of of speaking technical Italian and then getting paid some extra €100, I just felt like, sorry, I can't take that.
I
I
see.
couldn't stomach that.
I see. So
So I
I
never did.
had to do a lot of teaching assistantship, and
Yeah.
the first striking thing for me when I looked at the course content was, one, we studied too many things. We went
Mm,
very broad, and we were like this deep in the delivery of the course content, and
mm,
like you said, archaic materials that were used to teach us. But the content in itself, our course content, especially in electrical engineering, which that's what I did all through bachelor's, master's, PhD. That was what I did. I find the course content is actually very good coming from Nigeria.
mm,
The the content is exactly the same. We
mm,
were just it was just not delivered well.
mm,
And if anything, I think we actually had a lot more in our content than
mm,
what we have out here. Take, for instance, you studied electrical engineering. We did all these courses in mining engineering, in civil
mm,
engineering, mechanical, those disastrous courses that we struggled a lot. But I think the problem we have is actually, like you said, the delivery. But we mastered the how. How do
mm.
you learn? I think many of us were able to master that. So
Mm.
you think this is probably one of the things that sets us apart right now, living abroad, even in the delivery of our day-to-day jobs? Do you think?
Yeah, I would think so. I think this is actually very, very, very funny. 2 weeks ago, I was speaking with a colleague, and he was asking like, where did you learn all of this, like, how to like relate with people, how to like do all of this, like things that are not necessarily writing code, but just like, talk to people, try to get consensus and all of this kind of stuff. And I didn't have a lot of time to think, so I just said, oh yeah, I read books, I read this, how to make friends, blah blah blah. That was my answer. But then I got home and I just kept reading and saying, no, 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 I don't think it's just the books, because that would be a very cheapish way to get out of that kind of question. And I just
Hmm.
realized that there's lots of things relating to how that people don't really like, how to think, how to be a self-starter, how to self-assess yourself, how to benchmark yourself, even if the standard is broken. Say, for example, we take exams. And you and I remember there were cases where people would get A's, and then the professor would basically say, "Oh, in Nigeria would say, oh, we have too many A's. I'm going to downgrade people. I'm going to subtract marks, right? In that kind of case, you need to be able to self-assess yourself and say, oh, I think I actually got an A, but yeah, it's just the system is so broken that I'm not. And that kind of framework where you can honestly self-assess yourself, you can articulate things about yourself that you don't need the system to necessarily tell you this is where you're at. You can kind of do that internal work. I feel like a lot of that we got just from the system not having any of those framework, right? And so you come here and then you've had all of this internal changes which are not necessarily visible, but then it's inbuilt because you've experienced them, right? And I think those are very fundamental traits that Nigerians who have studied in Nigeria in the public university system or even private universities tend to have.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's a very good thing that you noted there, actually. So it's actually what maybe one way to put it is this: the problems we have actually instilled in us good virtues while trying to overcome each of those problems day to day in our lives. And you've been doing that, say, for many of us leave Nigeria in our 20s, and you've done that for 20 years of your life. You've kind of mastered it, and now it becomes a thing that you know like the back of your hand while you face life. Now, maybe this is one of the reasons why Nigerians tend to do well, even though I think we can do better in entrepreneurship, living abroad, because I think a lot of us kind of get to a point that you compare with what you're coming from.
Mm.
I don't think we actually compare with possibilities as we progress. So we come to a point that we kind of cap, we get to this rooftop and it's like you just settle. But you are going after some innovative things that you talked about earlier in this conversation. How do you break out of the mold, so to say, not comparing where you're coming from, but compare with the possibilities in front of you?
Yeah, I think for this particular question, I'll bring in an analogy because I've had time to think about this. There's a venture capitalist in the States, Anne Miracle. She's a partner at Floodgates. She gave a description. I was watching a video. She was talking. I think it was a speech at it's like I don't know, Stanford or something. I don't remember. And she described something she calls thunder lizards, right? Thunder and lizards. It says like they're lizards that are born from radioactive atomic eggs. They hatch from radioactive atomic eggs from a remote part of the planet. And they need to cross the Pacific and make their way into, for the mental model that she was painting, the States, right? So they get into San Francisco, and then they have this advantage that gives them disruptive power. Now, this is how I think about anyone. Again, there's ups and downs. So if you're in Nigeria, the system is broken. I feel like there's more people that are held back by the system than people who are actually toughened and made into some self-reliant, whatever thing we talked about, by the system. And this is how I'm starting to see that kind of advantage where you've learned to bypass a lot of these obstacles. Like so think about the tunnel lizard going to the Pacific Ocean, facing a lot of dangerous events, dangerous opposition, different kind of things in the ocean, and then they eventually make it to the States, and then they have this kind of energy, this drive, which is something I see with the average Nigerian, right? If you're born and raised in Lagos, you work in Lagos, you wake up at 4 a.m., you get to work on the island at 8, you finish at 5, you're back home at 8 p.m. because you spend 6 hours a day in traffic, and you still have to deliver, and people actually deliver. I feel like the energy is just so much. And then you move out and then life is comfortable, try public transport's great. And then I feel like the advantage is actually in there already. You just have to take it out. Just have to, get there and just disrupt in an entrepreneurship sense. And this is why I feel like the next frontier for me is to actually get in that space where I'm taking advantage of the things that I've learned and bringing that to bear.
That is a very good way to put it again, actually. I like that example. You should send me that article
Yeah, I
or
will.
the
I totally
speech,
will.
actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good one. Yeah, I like that. So you also realize that because many of us don't begin to pay attention to the possibilities in front of us, like you said, we come to a point of diminishing return, if you could say. But I think with the level of hardship that is going on in Nigeria right now, let me come back to the topic of Nigeria. We're Nigerians. With the level of hardship going on in Nigeria right now, it almost compares to growing up in the 90s for me, in the days of the military dictatorship of that time. The only reason why I think the hardship in Nigeria does not have as much impact, even though I don't undermine what people are going through right now, but it's not as bad because there's a lot of wealth coming from diaspora. 2019 or so, I think there was $65 billion that was generated from resources in diaspora. I think it was unreasonable of the government to even have counted that as part of the GDP, because I don't think that's GDP. That makes no sense to me. But 65 billion, that's significant. When you now take that resources and you put it into different countries, for instance, in Nigeria, it kind of goes down the drain because it goes into feeding, basic supplies. But how can diaspora generate true impact in Africa?
Yeah, this is a very good question, and I think anyone who's familiar with the term black tax does know that it's kind of looked down upon because it's a kind of thing you feel like you don't really get anything in return. It's more like this charitable expense, so to speak. I think and again, I'll speak about my case. So the model that I think that will work for me going forward is I look at so much talent. Take West Africa, for example, right? So much talent. There's going to be more people born in West Africa per square mile than probably anywhere else in the world going forward. At least looking at the data, I haven't really looked at the recent data, but it does look like that. Even if it's not number one, it's going to be top 10. Right now, what are we going to do with all of this talent? We just don't want to end up feeding people, right? Like I know Nigerians in diaspora have gone past feeding people because somehow the scaffolding, the social scaffolding abroad just gives you that kind of, gives you that kind of that base,
Mhm.
and so what I feel like people could be doing is investing not just in feeding people, but investing in the kind of change that drives progress, right? That drives
Mhm.
economic progress. I'm thinking, I'll put this out there. In the future, I would like to be a venture capitalist, for example, right? Look at all of these companies that are starting out. How can we invest in them? The last time I was in Nigeria, I actually invested in a company. There's a friend of mine. We both went to high school together. And I met with her. I said, "Oh, what are you doing now?" "Oh, she's running this company. Da 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 da." They raised some money, and I said, "Oh, okay, cool. I know this person. She's very driven, very smart." And I said, "Okay, I give you $15,000. Like, go figure out stuff. I take equity from the company." Now, there's more chances that will fail, but I feel like I'm more willing to bet on the country in that sense than just sending money and just feeding people, which is great. It's a noble cause. But I don't think that it removes us from that perpetual cycle of things not happening or going the way we want. We really need to start investing in a different way, investing in people in a different way.
So, do you think with the trajectory of the nation right now, is it a good place for businesses? I see a lot of people from different parts of the world, India especially. It's funny, sorry, I go on a divergence here, but India, for instance, especially when you look at the way BRICS is set up, right? India is investing a lot in Nigeria, not just in Nigeria, in a lot of African countries. China is investing a lot and taking over several manufacturing in many parts of the world. As far as Africa, go all the way to the Caribbean island. China is taking over a lot of opportunities and businesses out there. And of course, it's the way the trade agreements are set up that don't really benefit the people. And you put all of those um, resources together from all this foreign investment. Now, I think the question is, what is it in our system? Is it favorable to investment? For instance, you said you just put $15,000 into a business. I'll be scared to death to put 15,000 into a business right now, to be honest.
I'm
Especially if you
betting
can't give me.
I'm betting in the people. I'm betting in the people, not exactly the business. Right.
That's actually that. I think that's a good way to put it. If I bet on the system, I will be
Yeah.
scared to death to put
Yeah.
15,000 into it. So
Yes.
how
Yes.
favorable do you think, and what part of the system would actually become, if developed, if changed, would actually facilitate investment opportunities, especially from people like you and I?
For now, again, I don't have the kind of firepower when I look at the landscape in West Africa or Nigeria specifically. I would think energy it's a no-brainer. Like, energy is the very first thing we should invest in to bring. It's like you're living in the 18th or 19th century, right? You live in a say you live in a place locally in Lagos where you only get 19 hours of electricity in 3 days or 4 days or even in a week. That's not sustainable. You can't leapfrog into the future, even if you have the best payment apps, even if you have like the best, I don't know. We have very good software engineers, very good computer scientists in Nigeria, but I think energy is that bedrock. We really need to get energy right. So if I were to invest, I would start with energy. And again, I don't think as an individual, I don't think I have the firepower, but I think there could be some kind of consortium as we go forward, and I think the government also needs to play a big role in this. I know that there are conflicted interests. I don't want to go into all of that with, like, people sell generators. There are people who have businesses that have alternative energy sources and all of that stuff. I don't really care how the energy comes, even if it's alternative, as long as we can say we guarantee that there will be energy for people to run their businesses. I've been to Aba before. I see how people are very creative in Aba. It's just amazing how we're not doing so much to export things that we actually build in Aba to the rest of West Africa or even Africa, right? And I think the fundamental thing preventing people from scaling is energy, right? Obviously, there's the logistical part as well, which is like transport and all of those things. But again, it all comes back to energy. If you can't guarantee that I will get fuel at any time of the day, my logistic, you can have the best roads in the world. The roads will be useless if I can't guarantee that. I want to start my machine and I want to make or build or manufacture something. You can't really make any bets. Right, so I think from that point of view, it's really hard for foreign investments to go in and say, yes, we want to invest in Nigeria, when the base, you don't really have that thing the foundation you can actually build on a civilization. If you think about how America was built, for example, the Andrew Carnegie's and all the others, they focused on the fundamental infrastructure. So the train systems, the energy, invest big in all of these things. The steel industry, right, invested so big in this that by the time they had all of these things built, it was now easy for people to start saying, okay, now let's now build the Googles. Now let's now do the internet. Now let's now get to. But you can't leapfrog into LLMs if you don't have the energy to power your computers. Like, it just doesn't work. Right. So I know I haven't really answered the question, but I think if we were to make a leapfrog, it'd be to invest in the very foundational infrastructure that can support the higher things we're trying to build.
Yeah, and a couple of times friends have also asked me to come invest in different energy projects in the nation. And honestly, I'm scared to invest in it too. I know I can't all be scared every time. I have to at some point, bite the bullet and do something. But so my wife is a power engineer too, and every time we talk about the delivery of power, she will say, how do you even account for resources? She will say one thing is generation, which I'm familiar with that. Distribution is another thing.
Yeah.
If you want to do distribution, part of what you have to settle is the issue of population and housing. And if you don't settle them, say in parallel, I think one is going to frustrate the other one.
Yes.
So I think those are places where governmental policies will not come into place to support the business advancement or economic growth of the nation. And until I see that, honestly, the idea of investing in such a broken down system is terrifying to me. And maybe this is where this is where what you talked about in passing, that a consortium would be a good idea, which honestly I've been thinking about that a lot. A meaningful one, a meaningful consortium or a think tank where many of us who are abroad, especially highly intellectual people, like I think you and I belong in that, bring people together who also have a common goal, a common good. And you look at the way the U.S. was built, also a portion of that is from the Rockefeller Foundation. Forget about all the other things we could reference to with the foundation. But those are systems that help build the nation. And I really think we should be looking into that. Honestly, I'm considering that really deeply, especially these days. You come to a point, right, that I think you and I have become educated to the peak of what you can attain educationally and career-wise. Also, you're climbing up really fast. And now you look back at where you come from, 1.3 billion people in darkness and poverty and hunger and starvation and waste of resources, waste of time, and productivity is down to nothing. You wonder, how do you bring that to a point that it also becomes an internationally competitive nation like the ones we're living in. So I agree with the idea of a consortium and a think tank. Yeah, but I think that's something we should really pay attention to in the days to come.
Yeah,
maybe you lead that.
it's not going to be as easy as it sounds. I know that there like, I also think the advantage you and I have is that we have lived experiences, right? Which I think is what a lot of the foreign investors may not really have, right? You don't know that, for example, religion still plays a very big role in how people get informed in, oh, who are we getting into government? Even if they know that this person really isn't going to solve the problems, the nation's problems. It's probably going to solve my problem, but not the nation's problem, and they're comfortable with that, right? So there's still lots of dynamics at play. There's tribal elements at play in terms of policy. I already mentioned religion. I already mentioned there's big nepotism and all of that stuff. So I think in the end, for me, I think the baseline would be, I don't really care who's in government. I don't care who runs the country. As long as policies are stable and predictable and deterministic. So policies aren't changing every now and then, because I think this is also the big problem we have in Nigeria. Policies are always changing. Today they're like, oh, we want crypto. Oh, tomorrow we don't want crypto. And then the next day we want crypto. And then you can't really, there's no way you could say, I'm giving $1 million to a company that's doing P2P payments, right? And the same applies to energy, right? We haven't got a good stance on the energy. Petroleum industry bill tried to solve a lot of the issues with like the petroleum industry, but where's that brought us to today? We still have fuel scarcity in Nigeria. We still have people lining up queues for. So I think from a policy point of view, it's going to be an uphill battle. I think we reached a point where we can garner that economic goodwill. We can say, hey, let's have a consortium, let's raise $1 billion, and let's see what we can do. But if we don't have the policy to back that up, it's going to be a very challenging fight. So I think there has to be that balance, as you say.
Well, I think maybe part of this consortium or the think tank will be, we have to possibly figure out how to install the correct leaders also in power. I mean, that will require a lot of money.
I'm like,
oh, forgive me.
No, it's okay. It's absolutely okay. Yeah, it could also be installing. I don't know. Like I said, I'm not so much interested in the power of the day. I think that the Constitution and the law, the way civil laws are informed, should be greater than the partisan politics that we play, right? And this is where the West have really gotten it right. So where the Constitution is above anything, it's above the power of the day. It's above, and when we don't get to that point, I don't think even installing people would really work out well, because power has a way to intoxicate people. People can get in there and become something else. I've seen lots of freedom fighters. It's happened over and over again. I'm not going to name names, right? They probably, but I've seen lots of freedom fighters, in college, they got out, now they're politicians and they've completely lost touch with reality, right? And that's because our laws are still very weak. Constitution isn't very strong. But until we reach that point where we have very strong civil laws, very strong constitution, the enforcement is very strong. It's bigger than any individual power player of the day. That I think at that point, yes, people can even be more comfortable not caring, is it this party? Do they belong to this religion? Do they belong to that tribe? We don't really care. As long as we know that the constitution will be observed, it's very deterministic for business. I think about entrepreneurs. So the mental model that I have for entrepreneurs is they're tightrope walkers, right? You're doing a tightrope walk. Now imagine if the rope is very slack. It's not taut. There's not much you can do. You can almost not even walk on the rope, right? So the policies where you have that deterministic tight policy where it doesn't matter who's doing the tightrope walk, it doesn't matter who's holding the rope, as long as there is some determinism in the policy, install or not install, it doesn't matter. I think what matters is what comes out as the outcome.
Right. I think there's a lot to think about for the future, honestly. But I think this is a point where we can put an end to we can slowly wrap this up.
Yeah.
What should the average Nigerian abroad think about? I mean, you've been. It's by every stretch of imagination, you're a successful person living abroad.
Am I successful? Okay. If you say it.
Well, whether we agree or not, I will say yes. You're a successful person living abroad.
Appreciate the vote of confidence. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, leave an advice for someone who will be in your shoes, say 10 years ago? 12 years ago now.
I would say just keep your dream alive. If there's one thing that's been very common in the circles I've moved through, so someone who came into Europe had no dime to my name on any accounts, and then now I feel like I'm comfortable. I kind of reached a state where I can start to invest in other people. Back in the day, I would tell people things, and people might snigger, they might laugh, or they might say things, which is it may be unexpected, right? But I think we have to get comfortable with telling people things they might laugh at us. You might say something like, "Oh, I want to do this big thing," or "I want to do that thing," right? It doesn't mean that we should shy away from it. I even think that kind of feedback also helps us calibrate the kinds of things that we are purporting to do, right? So if I say I want to do this thing and it just turns out that there's a disconnect between what I can actually do and what I'm saying that I want to do, it means I still have work cut out for me, right? So I think people should continue to be ambitious. We should not let the fire of, oh yeah, we've left our countries, because one of the hardest things for lots of people leaving is just, it's just, if you live in the diaspora, the life is very different. You go home, you see your parents once a year, you see extended family once. It's a very painful. It's not
It
it's not the
is.
most exciting experience. Yeah, economically it's great, but you're out there, you cut out in some way from your base community. But yeah, the one thing you have is hope, and that hope can only come to life if you keep your dreams alive, right? You're not going to hope that some government is going to come and fix the problem. I like to think that the hope is us, the hope is in us, and that people should keep their dreams alive, keep their ambitions alive. I know that I don't want to say something like, "Oh, it's going to get better." It's probably going to get worse for in the short term, the way things are going. But I think if we keep hope alive, it's our hope that actually means that, or the kind of ambition and the drive and the energy and committing our talent to that hope, that actually means that the tide can change. Otherwise, there's just nothing. Yeah. So just keep hope alive and keep
Yeah.
ambition alive, keep
hmm
the energy alive.
I think a lot of people need that out there.
Mm,
Actually, in my 30-something years now, almost 40 years being Nigerian, this is
mm,
one time that I feel prior to now, there's never been a shortage of hope in Nigeria. But in
mm,
recent time, I began to see that there is a sense of hopelessness that's setting
mm,
in for a lot of people in Nigeria.
mm,
And I also agree with you on the part that it's hard living abroad as an immigrant for sure. You're
mm,
far from your family. It's almost like you're cut out of the daily experiences from your family, parents. Like
mm,
my mother passed when
mm.
I, after I immigrated here, right?
Oh,
You're not
sorry
even
about that.
there in those final moments. Oh, thank you.
Mm,
There in the final moments, like I have my grandmother there now. The
mm,
thought of, oh, she could pass any day. I'm sure
mm,
nobody like to think of such. You just feel like you're not. It's like you're building a new set of experiences for
mm,
yourself now. Like, what would my own children call, cousins
mm,
and nephews and whatnot,
mm,
and
mm.
friends who've become like kind of my family now. So those are the realities of life for being an immigrant, and that's where
Yeah,
you gotta keep hope alive for real. Because if you're
yeah,
losing that, you don't want to lose. Don't want to lose on the part of hopefulness as well.
yeah,
But man,
yeah.
thanks for yeah. You want to say something?
No, no, no. I was going to say I appreciate the time. Yeah, very, very good
Oh
conversation
yeah,
and
yeah.
good
Thank
questions.
you.
Yeah.
It's a very good conversation.